And then finally, we're going to just address the question of obesity in pregnancy, because what the mother eats during pregnancy, it turns out, is critically important, as I showed. Because if the mother becomes pre-diabetic or diabetic, she has a high glucose concentration in her bloodstream. That glucose is transferred to the fetus across the placenta, but insulin doesn't cross the placenta. So the fetus must produce its own insulin to control its own glucose concentration. And the more glucose that is coming across the placenta means the higher the insulin concentration that the fetus has to produce. And insulin, we've shown you what it does in the healthy adults. It does exactly the same in the fetus. And so let's look at that. So increased rates of obesity in recent decades mean that there have been increasing numbers of pregnant women who are obese. Remember, obesity is very likely linked to insulin resistance and a high carbohydrate diet. So the risk of childhood obesity is increased by 30 to 40% when women either enter pregnancy while overweight or obese, or when they gain excessive weight during pregnancy, regardless of their pre-pregnancy weight. Overweight and obese women are 3 times more likely to exceed the recommended weight gain guidelines during pregnancy than are healthy weight women, leading to the delivery of larger babies. Why are they larger? Because they're more insulin resistant and they have stored that carbohydrate coming from the mother as fat. And but that's not the problem, because fat is good for a fetus, but it's the insulin resistance that is the nature. And just to give you an idea of how important that insulin resistance is now, pediatricians have to worry when a child is born. If it's insulin resistance, its blood glucose will fall dramatically, and it may get what we call hypoglycemic coma. And that didn't exist 50, 60 years ago, but now is a real problem. In mothers who are insulin resistant, eat too much carbohydrate, they deliver insulin-resistant babies who are over-secreting insulin. And the moment that they're born, their blood glucose will fall, and that puts them at risk of ill health. So we don't want larger infants, and we're going to get larger infants if we've got pregnant mothers who have the metabolic syndrome or diabetes. So committee members were told that larger infants are more likely than healthy weight babies to become overweight children who grow into overweight and obese adolescents. The cycle continues, then these overweight young women become pregnant. And the problem is further compounded when women do not get down to a healthy weight before the next pregnancy. So that's the issue. And that's why every generation is fatter than the previous generation. And that's not going to change unless we do something radical. So witnesses discussed the proposed theory that the intrauterine environment of women who gain too much weight during pregnancy is altered and may result in epigenetic changes in the fetus's DNA. And as I spoke previously, epigenetic means that you've got the same DNA, but it responds slightly differently because it's been changed, its control has been changed by these factors in the environment. So the DNA is the same, but the way it responds is different. So this refers to small chemical changes to the genetic material that affect the way it is read, leading to increased risk of childhood overweight and obesity. And then this is, again, a really important point because in my opinion, the cause of the obesity epidemic is that we're eating addictively. And it's the foods that make us eat addictively. And we presented that evidence about the bliss point and how foods are all designed for the bliss point to make sure you eat more, and so that you're hungry every 3 hours instead of being hungry every 12 to 16 hours, which is a normal biological state for humans. So satiety refers to the feeling of being full after eating. Several witnesses described the roles of the macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates in producing satiety. Specifically, James DiNicolantonio of St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute explained that fat and protein are quite satiating, while carbohydrates, particularly refined grains and free sugars, were described as less satiating and can in fact cause a person to crave more. And that's, to me, is the key statement about why we become fat, because the foods that we're eating are causing us to get hungry and to overeat. Generally speaking, the more satiating a food is, the less of a person is likely to eat. So as described above, starches and sugars are quickly emptied from the stomach. Consequently, they do not produce a feeling of being full for very long. And that's very simplistic. There are many more explanations why fat and protein satiate you. It's not just by what's happening in the stomach. But proteins and fat, on the other hand, remain in the stomach longer before being emptied in the small intestine. As a result, meals that are high in fat and protein are more satiating than high carbohydrate meals. The committee was told that high carbohydrate diets would result in less satiety and therefore increased consumption. And that's the key point that I've been making at length, is that if you're going to eat a high carbohydrate diet, you have to warn people that you're going to be hungry and you can eat more calories. And I never see that in any dietary guidelines that warning is published.
In the testimony of Ms. Claire Jalsing, she indicated that you didn't engage with her. They tried to engage with you. They tried to talk to you about the diet that you proposed, and you didn't respond. Can you say anything about that?
Yes, indeed. And what stimulated me to answer that question was an article that was published by Ms. Jalsing-Stratum in the period since the last hearing in February. And I think it was published in the Argus, the local newspaper. And there's the title, "The Case Against Noakes Was Not Laid on a Whim." And what she does in this article actually is to reproduce much of her testimony, the points from her testimony, which have a negative impact on me because I'm not sure that I agree with all of those statements. And this is the part of the problem that in defending myself, I frequently don't have an opportunity to speak to the media about these sorts of stories. But the point I like to make here is that I had the ADSA come to me and said, "Tim, we've got a problem with you, let's discuss it." I am the first person who would be there to discuss it with them. That is my nature. My nature is I'm a teacher, I'm an academic. I've spent my life trying to educate people. I do not stand back when people come and ask for advice. That's why I've had such a good academic career, why I had 40 PhD students. I accept people with the weirdest ideas and help them do their research. So, and I won't go into that, but anyways, that my nature is open and sharing. And now to be told that ADSA approached me and I'm the problem, that is simply not the case. And so I just want to put it on record that I was not approached by ADSA in a meaningful way. And in fact, ADSA did everything against to prevent me from speaking. So we'll go through what she said. So it says the Association for Dietetics in South Africa did engage with Noakes through face-to-face meetings as far back as 2013 to discuss concerns related to his dietary advice that were raised by members of the association. Now, I frankly don't remember those, and maybe I forgot, but I can certainly say one thing, that I've only ever spoken to Ms. Stratum once in my life, and that was when we both gave talks in Johannesburg at a meeting. It was organized by Abbott Laboratories, who are involved in diabetes. She gave a lecture, I gave a lecture. Afterwards, I came up and said some pleasantries to her, even though I knew that she had laid this complaint. And that would have been March, April, May 2014. So it was in the period after that she laid the complaint. There was nothing about, she was concerned about the dietary advice. She did not raise it. ADSA invited Noakes to present his evidence at a branch meeting. And it is true, I spoke 3 times to dietitians in Cape Town, in Durban, and in Pietermaritzburg. But they were not branch meetings, they were meetings of dietitians. And the impression you're getting there is that they invited me to discuss this thing. Well, it didn't. I just spoke, as I always do, about the science of the low carbohydrate diet. Then the next statement is also misleading. It says I was given the opportunity to publish his findings in the South African Journal of Clinical Nutrition. That is not entirely correct. ADSA invited Jacques Rousseau to write an article that was critical of my opinions. And that was the basis of the lecture where we'd had our debate, the centenary debate. They went to him and said, well, why don't you put into the journal your argument against Dr. Noakes? The editor of the journal then phoned me and said, listen, I've got this article from Professor Rousseau. I would like you to have the opportunity to publish an article next to it. The request came from the editor of the journal. It didn't come from the ADSA organization. So ADSA also paid for executive committee members to attend Noakes' low-carb conference last year and provide feedback to members. That's perhaps irrelevant. And then she said, I have in my personal capacity also emailed Noakes to explain my concerns with the selection of his dietary recommendations.
It's 6:16, Madam Chair, sorry.
To which he responded with thanks for the respectful way in which I engaged with him. And she says, I asked him not to give untested recommendations about infant nutrition. Now, I admit that it's entirely possible that she did send me emails which I could not find. But I went through all my emails and I found two from her. And the first one was not addressed to me. It was a copy to a lady called Celine Erasmus, who I have no idea who she is. And it says, Hi Celine, thanks, I got your message. Here is the contact details for Professor Tim Noakes. I just wanted to check something with you. We have seen patients from the, in quotation marks, Well I Am challenge. I don't know what that is, but it's obviously some sort of competition. And noted that they are using the nutritional solution exchanges for the program, and that's her product. And she says, is that correct? Do you know? Thanks, Claire. So that had nothing to do with me. And the other article was a response to Karen Thompson and myself, because Karen had invited Ms. Stradom to speak at our low-carb conference. And she said, Dear Karen, thank you for the invitation. I however have other commitments at this time. Kind regards, Claire. And that is the only two emails that I can trace in which she directly wrote to my email address. I'm not saying that it might not be somewhere else, but I don't recall that she had written that. And so then she goes on, ADSA became gravely concerned with this advice. And then she concludes, to be clear, no pediatric guidelines in the world recommend that a healthy infant go on a low carbohydrate, high fat complementary feeding plan, which is not true in my view, because I presented the evidence that there are major pediatric guidelines around the world which are compatible with the low carbohydrate, high fat diet. And I'd remind you that one of the expert witnesses for the prosecution, Dr. Kruger, said on page 659 of the testimony that Noakes's guidelines are compatible with SA food-based guidelines. And she also said at the same time, that's page 659, on page 660, she said that the low carbohydrate, high fat diet is not harmful. So those are the arguments, and we can go through the points in the testimony where Stradom makes these points in the testimony. So I'm just going to very briefly indicate to you that the content of that Argus article is the same as what's in her presentation. So on page 190, it says, I had asked Professor Noakes not to give infant information anymore on Twitter on the 28th of January 2014. And I don't recall that. She then said, I have on occasion asked him to provide me with systematic reviews and meta-analysis giving his information in this regard. And that's on page 227. And again, that's really, I don't recall that, but even if it was, it's not my responsibility. She's the expert. And if she wants to make herself an expert, she must study the evidence. But had she asked it, I would have sent it to her. So my argument is that in my previous testimony, I presented evidence to conflict with her statement that no dietary guidelines in the world promote a low carbohydrate, high fat diet for infants. And I would argue that the ADSA guidelines themselves, and this is a repetition of the evidence that I gave, and ADSA guidelines themselves say that foods from animals, meat, poultry, fish or eggs, should be eaten daily or as often as possible to meet protein and iron needs, etc. And then they warn against vegetarian diets. So to me, that is, the ADSA guidelines are exactly the same as the guidelines that we presented. And then Professor Foster herself said in her guidelines, her analysis of the ADSA guidelines published for the Nutrition Society of South Africa, from 6 months of age, give your children meat, chicken, fish or eggs every day or as often as possible, which again is entirely compatible with the low carbohydrate, high fat eating pattern. And recall that if you go into the testimony of Professor Foster, she acknowledges that there are no guidelines between 6 and 12 months saying that the child must eat carbohydrates. Carbohydrates do not come into the guidelines. And then this again from Professor Foster in the revised food-based dietary guidelines for South Africa, repeat the same: from 6 months of age, give your baby meat, chicken, fish or egg every day or as often as possible. And if you are eating that amount of meat, chicken, fish or egg every day, that diet will be high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. And then I showed as the evidence that this is the green list from the Real Meal Revolution, and it contains exactly those foods, so that had people read the Real Meal Revolution and had they seen what is the green list, they would have said this is entirely compatible with the dietary guidelines for South Africa, and those are compatible with the weaning guidelines for the ADSA and the South African dietary guidelines. So our legal advisor, Adam Pike, responded to that article by Ms. Stradom, and it was published in the Argus, April 7th, 2016. And he made the point, instead of inviting him to speak at their meetings, they invited and continued to invite his detractors. And one particular lecturer presenting to ADSA was entitled, "Is Noakes the North Korea of Epistemology?" And what we need to recognize that the person who gave that lecture is in fact the son of Professor Jacques Rousseau, who had a debate with me at the UCT dietary debate on cholesterol and heart disease. It was really interesting to me that ADSA's most recent conference, the question was, who was the primary person invited to speak? And it turns out it was Dr. David Katz. And this is a blog about Dr. David Katz, who's listed as junk food slyest defender. This man has no love of Dr. Katz, as you can see, but he provides evidence which is of some interest to us. So he writes, Katz is the junk food industry's subtlest paid advocate. He has developed a strategy that allows him to introduce junk food industry talking points without coming across as a shill. A shill is someone who presents himself as something, but behind it he's something else. And the classic example is that you go to an auction and you think that this person is bidding in honesty, and in fact they're being paid by someone else to push the price up, and then they stop bidding when the price has reached a certain level. So they are a fake, presenting themselves as something else. So Katz concedes a minor point to the public health crowd in order to establish his bona fides and come across as a credible source. Then he comes across with a sweeping claim that defends the junk food industry and its paid research. So Katz's 1-2 strategy combined with journalistic negligence, and that's a real issue, that we've lost journalistic, investigative journalism globally, has allowed him to escape serious scrutiny, but no longer it's time to correct the record. And the record is, this is who he is paid consultant with. Here is some of the money that he is paid to be a consultant to these organizations. And I point that these are not foods that you would think that you want our children to be eating. Hershey bars, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, or Quaker Oats, the Western Sugar Cooperative, and Kind Bars, for which he got paid $154,000 for promoting low-sugar Kind Bars. So this is the man who is invited by ADSA to be their primary speaker at their most recent conference. So the person continues to write, Katz has managed to live two lives. One as a paid junk food apologist, the other as an independent source for public health information. But what makes his story more remarkable is that he successfully played both roles under a single name, and the media and government failed to adequately vet him for conflicts of interest, all the while promoting his work to the unknowing public. Now, I wonder if when he spoke to ADSA at the Congress, whether he had a slide, as I gave the previous slide, showing that these are his conflicts of interest. And if he didn't, that is a failing of ADSA to have indicated that this man has significant conflicts of interest. And because he also gets funding from the CDC, this Center for Disease Control, US taxpayers provided the core funds for his research. Logically and physically, only one Dr. Katz can exist. His public health persona may be a facade, but the millions he's accepted from junk food companies remains matters of fact. Now, why is this relevant, specifically relevant to this case? And the answer is very simple, that he has started an organization which has 120 directors around the world. And the statement is on her website. Mrs. Yulsing-Stratum acknowledges that she has recently been invited to be one of the 120 members of the Council of Directors for the GLIMMER, which is the Global Lifestyle Medicine Mobilizing to Effect Reform. The founder of this initiative, the goal of which is to be, quote, a global voice devoted to disseminating and applying what we know for sure about health promotion and disease prevention, is Dr. David Katz, MD, the man who is so compromised because of all these conflicts of interest. And so you have to ask serious questions about what is the influence of Dr. David Katz has on the complainant and on ADSA. And what is the linkage between his organization, Global Lifestyle Medicine Mobilizing to Effect Reform? What really is their global message? What are they trying to achieve? And why is South Africa involved with them? Because it seems to me that he's not the type of person that you would want to be involved with.